A very good day to everybody. Thanks for clicking on to Monday, the what day is it? The 13th of January edition of Vogan's European Outlook. It has been an impressive cold spell, nothing like on par with the major cold spells like 87, 2010, even 2013, for example. But we have seen a fairly decent shot of cold over the last 12 days, and this is the temperature anomaly across Europe through the first 13 days of the month. We're pretty much on the cusp of the midpoint of meteorological winter. But you can see here for the month of January, firmly below average so far for UK, Ireland, and Norway, Sweden, and Finland. The majority of the rest of Europe is actually running warmer than average for the month so far. But if we look at the past 45 days, which really incorporates the month of December, first half of January, this is how things are looking according to the CDAS data anyway. We can see here that we're running largely averaged above average across the UK and Ireland, and obviously the forecast has been that we would see an overall milder December, cold first half to January, and somewhat milder second half to the month of January, and it's all looking like it's playing out as expected here. I suppose the return of mild has been ever so slightly early compared to what I expected, but nonetheless it has been a decent cold first half to the month of January. I was obviously at Altnahara back on the early hours of Saturday morning, and fully experienced that minus 19 Celsius, and got some videos, got some photographs as well. So do check out the video here on the YouTube channel, and also if you follow me on Facebook and Twitter, there's some nice photographs. I think especially on Facebook, actually, I've released some photographs from that little road trip up to the icebox of the UK. But we do have an overall setup now that looks as if it's becoming very favourable for largely mild than average. We may have a little bit of back and forth, but when you've got a generally Atlantic-driven pattern, it is largely leaning on the mild side. We're going to get a little bit of ups and downs, especially if you've got areas of low pressure moving in ahead of those lows. We've got milder moving north, and behind those lows you get something a little bit colder on the back side. But looking at the polar vortex first and foremost, the mean zonal winds, one of two ways of looking at the strength of the polar vortex, the health of the vortex. You can see here that it's largely in record strong territory in terms of those mean zonal winds. And when you also look at the 50 millibar level, which is the lower portion of the stratospheric polar vortex, this is how it's looking at this very moment in time. So go back to the here and now, the initial. You can see here we've got some warming take place Eastern Asia, across the North Pacific, into North America. We are going to see a particularly cold final 10 days or so of January, it looks like, for the United States. Because if you look at the 50 millibar level out a week from now, you can see a lot of warming taking place across East Asia, North Pacific, Alaska, into northern portions of North America. We're going to see intrusions of Arctic air drilling south into the eastern side of North America. But when you've got this negative and cold pool over Greenland, over to the north of the UK and Ireland, that suggests to me, and it has been for some time now, that we're likely to see more of a firmly positive North Atlantic oscillation. Now, the Arctic oscillation is one thing, the NAO is another thing. If we look at the latest of the GFS ensemble for the Arctic oscillation, you can see that it goes into firmly positive territory. Then it takes a little bit of a dip back towards weekly negative, and therefore then it goes back positive once again. But if you look at the North Atlantic oscillation, you can see here that it is trending towards neutral. Neutral being low heights towards Iceland and positive heights south of the UK and Ireland. Generally, our flow comes in from the west when you've got that ridge trough set up over Western Europe, Eastern North Atlantic. But looking at the models here, this is off the GFS ensemble for the upcoming 7 days. We've got quite an anticyclonic setup here for the next 7 days. We've got a trough exit in Eastern North America. We've got a negative over the majority of Greenland, as you can see here. And then as we play through this sequence, you've got high pressure building over the North Pacific, Alaska, Northwest Canada. That's allowing the trough then to dig into Central and Eastern North America. Cold Arctic air getting driven southwards. And what you would start to expect here is that once we lose that kind of high pressure dominated setup over the UK and over Ireland through the next 7 days or so, we are likely to see the high weaken over the UK and Ireland, as can be seen here. And then we start to see with this increased gradient here, this thermal gradient over the North American side and into the eastern portions of the United States, Western Atlantic, you then start to strengthen the jet stream. And therefore, I would not be surprised if we start to see a deeper trough setting up over the North Atlantic, Iceland, positive heights then sink southwards. And it wouldn't be surprising, by the way, if we start to see a powerful jet stream develop over the North Atlantic in conjunction with the setup over North America, and the fact that we've got quite a strong polar vortex both within the stratosphere and it's becoming increasingly strong within the troposphere as well. It's becoming quite coupled. So you've got that downward transfer of very cold air suspended in the upper levels of the stratosphere. That then propagates down into the lower strat, into the troposphere. You then start to tighten the polar vortex, and the low heights then gain strength to up towards Iceland. That reinforces the positive North Atlantic oscillation. Arctic oscillation is one thing. We may see a little bit of a negative Arctic oscillation, but positive NAO setup. That's quite typical of a La Nina and a West QBO type setup on the broader scale of things. But you can see here, this is a period Thursday 23rd of January through Thursday the 30th of January. We've got quite the neutral NAO setup here, where you've got negative heights over the North Atlantic extending the Greenland here. We've got slightly suppressed positives here and quite a flat zonal look to that setup here, which really emphasizes the fact that we could see something more stormy developing. What would even re-emphasize that point even further is when you've got the MJO that's expected. At the moment, it's over the south portion of the Pacific, over South America, into the Atlantic Basin. We've got a lot of subsidence over the Central and West Pacific, extending up into North America. But if we play through this loop, you can see here that as we move towards Sunday, this upcoming weekend, the 19th of January, we're starting to see an amplified phase 2, 3 of the MJO. Remember, I showed you in recent times that the MJO is likely to become more amplified and then rotate out of the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean. That then could enhance with the Arctic air drilling south into the eastern side of North America with the strength of the polar vortex and that phase 2, 3 of the MJO. This really screams out stormy or unsettled or Atlantic driven as we move through the second half of this month here. But it's not necessarily as clear cut as saying this is just going to be a blowtorch second half of January. I'm still hoping anyway that anomaly through the first 13 or so days of January holds, and we don't see necessarily exceptional mildness. I would like to see that, overall my January idea plays out quite well, where we've got maybe average, possibly a slight lean towards slightly colder than average for the month of January overall. Remember what the forecast states: warmer than average for the winter, and that's combining December through February. That entire period, I think we're going to have a slightly warmer than average winter. It's looking quite like that. And as we continue to play through here, you can see that we reinforce that upward motion according to the GFS ensemble over the Indian Ocean, extending into phases 4 and 5, so the maritime continent. And the very, very end of the loop, you can see here that albeit we start to lose that green, which means that we start to weaken the MJO enhancement, but we're starting to see those greens almost kind of drift eastwards into the North Pacific, which may kind of slightly suggest the lean back towards something a little bit more in terms of colder phases of the MJO, so maybe phases 7 and 8, possibly. You notice the subsidence over and near the dateline within the equatorial region in the Pacific. That's likely because of that cold waters now that has really started to set in over the central and north Pacific, or the central Pacific as a whole. I think the upward motion does not like to develop over colder than average waters. But we've seen that cooling over the last 4 or 5 weeks over the Central Pacific near the date line, which has meant we've had quite a Central Pacific based La Nina develop, and therefore we're seeing subsidence over that cold water compared to average. But we're seeing, obviously, with warm waters to the north of that compared to average, we're seeing those greens maybe become attracted, that upward motion becoming attracted to that warmer waters to the north of the equatorial Central Pacific near the date line. So, but this kind of overall setup supports a phase 4 5 MJO. It supports a milder theme for many portions of the northern hemisphere, but particularly so north western portions of Europe. But it's very interesting to see how this all plays out. If we look at the temperature anomalies of the GFS ensemble, we'll look at Europe specifically, and we'll have a look and see what the temperature anomalies are suggested by the GFS ensemble here. So this is obviously of tropical tidbits. Let's go back to the upper heights. In fact, we'll look at that there. Go back to the upcoming 5-day period. So obviously high pressure, largely drier than average theme across much of Europe. In fact, apart from the down across the Mediterranean west side of the basin, we've got some slightly unsettled conditions here. The day 6 through 10, we still have that high pressure a little bit up towards southern Scandinavia. If you notice, we've got a negative here suppressed a little bit further to the southwest of the UK and Ireland. Then the 11 to 15 day, we've got the positive to the Central and East Europe. We've got the negative out over the Atlantic to the west. Temperature anomaly wise here, I can't see much else other than somewhat leaning more mild compared to average for the foreseeable upcoming 5 days. Warmer than average Ireland, UK, north. Slightly closer to average the further south you go over England, if you notice here. But generally speaking, you're splitting hairs. It's warmer than average overall. In the 6 to 10 day, you can see here that we're leaning slightly warmer than average. And this is something that may play out in terms of what the cold anomaly that we've built up over recent times here. If we don't have a particularly significant spell of milder than average, we may hold out close to average when all is said and done. Does that make sense? I hope it does. But you can see here in the 6 to 10 day, it's slightly warmer than average. And then the 11 to 15 day, we're leaning slightly colder than average across northern UK, slightly milder across the south. Now, I think the reasons for that is that we're going to start to see low pressure becoming more dominant towards the final week to 10 days of the month, which may mean that we're with colder drilling south over the eastern side of North America. You strengthen the jet, you could actually start to transport with these areas of low pressure. If we start to see deeper lows with a zonal jet crossing from North America to Europe, we may import some of these kind of colder air masses coming off North America. Obviously, they moderate significantly as it crosses the relative warmth in the North Atlantic. But generally speaking, it would suggest not as much of a mild setup if you start getting a much more active jet stream. Looking at the jet here, let's go back and look at the North Atlantic as a whole, and we'll look at the strength of the jet. I've not actually looked at this yet, so I'm curious to see what this model shows. But you can see here that as we play through the loop, high pressure forces the jet both west and north of the UK through the course of this week. And you've got a very strong jet stream, jet core exiting the eastern side of North America, as can be seen here. Then as we continue to play through, you're starting to see that reinforced jet stream because of the intrusions of Arctic air into eastern North America. That then tightens the gradient between the subtropical warmth and Arctic. That forces the jet core to become stronger. And then with low pressure developing along that jet, you would be expecting to see some areas of low pressure getting thrown our way as we move through the second half of the month. And especially with that MJO coinciding with phase 2 and 3, the strength of the polar vortex, etc., etc. This has a bit of a 2013-14 look, and that's not the first time I've made mention of that, by the way, in throughout this winter so far, that I think there is a possibility of a 13-14 stormy spell within this overall setup. Finally, let's look at the ECM for the rest of this work week. and you can see here how it's looking. So southwesterly winds were importing much milder conditions here. In fact, this is impressive. This is obviously Altnahara, coldest spot in the UK. Officially, we do have like Highland Weather Network sites that were recording -20 back on early Saturday morning, but the official reading from Altnahara stands as the official data for the UK, and Altnahara -18.9 on Saturday morning is the coldest for January since 2010. We've seen a maximum both on Friday and Saturday of -9, minimums of -18.9 and -12 respectively. Then we shot up to 7.7 degrees on Sunday with a minimum of 2. Today, 12 and a minimum of 8 Celsius. That is a remarkable rise in temperature within a 48-hour period, isn't it really? Especially when you take Friday out of the equation, but look at Saturday and Sunday. Look at that rise, and then of course today also. Looking at the meteoscale for the current temperatures, I'm kind of, as always, kind of moving and jumping around. Coldest conditions still remain over the bulk of England and Wales, where you've got the high pressure that brought a chilly-ish morning across the south and east of the country, but where you've got those stronger southwesterly winds, we're seeing temperatures 12 to 14 Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland through the course of this afternoon. We'll skip back, 24 hours or so. You can see the difference as we progressed through the course of yesterday. Yesterday really was the first big change as we held on to the cold during the course of Saturday, but we've seen that transition really develop during the course of yesterday. But you can see here, if we go back to the current setup here then and play through this week, you've got generally weather systems flirting with the northwest here, area of low pressure at 964 millibars over the North Atlantic. We've got 1035 high to the south of the UK. This screams out a positive NAO pattern, and reasonably dry as well, as areas of low pressure essentially miss both our west and north shore through this week. So not a great deal of rain. That is welcome news, I'm sure, for many. And then as we continue to play through this week, you can see here that we start to see something a little bit more Atlantic driven as we move towards next week. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start to pick up on something stormier after what is a fairly settled and anticyclonic work week this week. Next week may be something quite different. If we look at the 850s here, you can see that it is generally on the mild side of things through the next several days here. So this is back to here now. No cold air in place now over the next few days here. Continue to see that the feed of southwesterly subtropical air continue to play through, and then we'll start to see something a little bit different seen by the ECM early next week. So that's it for today. Like and subscribe. See you next time with more. Bye.